So, guys, I want to do another tough story, and I also want to talk about something that there were two nails in the coffin with, my relationship with my father. And I also understand, like when we are parents, we tell people, advice that we've held on to for a long time, really. And sometimes that can be for better and that can be for worse. Sometimes we don't realize the outcome of our advice. But as we get older, I think it's important for us to share how advice has helped us and hurt us. And I also feel another part of it is me sharing my own advice to help out people. And there's always things where people follow advice, and it can lead to both good and bad outcomes, even if the intention was always good. So I want to do another video of called bad workplace advice, and I want to talk about some of the advice I've gotten in the workplace. Like what happened was I graduated college in 2010. This is when the economy was doing bad, and I had a very, very hard time getting a job. So the first piece of bad advice I got was to tell my employer I can work all the hours that I can. Like I was applying for jobs anywhere. I remember applying for McDonald's in Guilford, Connecticut, and my dad and I filled out an application, and my dad was saying something like, you got to redo it because you never ever put down something like you can only work 8 hours. You have to put down I'm available 24/7. If they call you in the middle of the night, I will gladly buy you a flashlight so you can be walking 6 miles down to McDonald's. And this is actually extremely stupid advice because for a couple of reasons. That number one, I lived in Connecticut, so it's very, very dark. So what would happen if I get hit by a car, really? So that's one thing. The next thing is that if you say you work 24/7, then you start to have bosses that'll be like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna call you in the middle of the night for this thing, that thing, this thing, that thing, really. So you're never really gonna have a life. Or if you have plans like you're gonna go see your girlfriend, or you're gonna go out to a movie, or you're gonna go celebrate a dinner, you're gonna have your boss call you, and then you're gonna have your dad pick up the phone and be like, hey, oh yes, he's gonna be there. Get going. Work's more important, really. So it does teach that it's going to allow you to be taken advantage of. And like I said, put you in a bad situation because nighttime is more dangerous than daytime. And then also the other thing too is that, you have to have limitations because the problem is that, again, what's like, I remember like one time I worked at a job called Conway, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I had a boss ask me if I wanted to come over to his house and do like moving and other things like that, like just help him move furniture around, other things. I didn't do that because my boss was a big sketchball and he had a bunch of problems, really. But again, if I was living with my father, he would be like, oh no, he's going to do that, bright and early. He's going to pay me for the gas to get me to his place and to get me to your place. So that's another big problem, is teaching our children to be available 24/7 for their jobs, really, because that teaches no work-life balance. That teaches someone to be taken advantage of. And that can also teach other situations, like maybe somebody's like, oh, well, the boss invited me to their house and they're kind of sketchy. Well, that's going to happen because of the paycheck. The other piece of bad advice I was told was not responding to workplace violence and bullying. That when I worked at Conway, the store was robbed by its own security guards. I suffered from PTSD and suicidal thoughts for about 10 years. And my manager would do things like, he'd have me sit in the chair, he would stand above me and yell and curse in my face. There was a time where an assistant manager was crying because of how much he was cursing and yelling at me. And I've actually had assistant managers say something like, if you do not get this project done, or if you do not stay over, I will kill you. I'll take out my knife and I'll cut you. So some things my father knows about and he doesn't know about. But I remember wanting to talk to the Department of Labor about that. And I did tell them everything. They said that they're going to file a report and do other things like that, And I was like, oh, I want to talk to my father first because I know there's going to be workplace retaliation. My father said, no, you do not do that. You need to focus about getting a better job, really. Or they would do something at my job where they would have everybody be security guards. So sometimes you'd see like these guys who look like football players, and the boss would be telling these 80-pound girls to say, hey, guys, stop, tell these guys to stop stealing, really. When they can easily, like, punch this little girl in the face, really, and that be that. So, or there was a time where they tried to catch a shoplifter. My boss was dragging this woman in by her ankle and twisting it like he's Kurt Angle, really. So so again, my dad being like, no, whenever you see other people about to get hurt or whatever, you just have to ignore that. You just have to focus on getting a better job, really. Somebody actually committed suicide because of the bullying that my manager did at Conway, and then also I almost committed suicide because of his bullying. There have been people who thrown bricks at Conway. There have been people taking out guns and and pistol whipping a manager during the robbery and other things like that. But when you have a parent that says, no, you do not talk to the Department of Labor, you need to focus on your career, and what happens to everybody else, that's not your problem, that's bad advice, really, because that could have saved maybe a suicide from happening. Oh, that could have shut the store down earlier. Oh, that could have led to not just my manager, but the district manager and other people on top being informed about all this, bad behavior, really. So being told to just, let things go, not report dangerous environments is not good. The second thing is how to appropriately make consequences. That I remember after working 27 months at Conway, developing PTSD from almost being murdered when the store was robbed by his own security guard, struggling with suicidal thoughts, struggling with self-harm thoughts, thinking about cutting myself, almost attempting suicide a couple of times, being bullied. My manager is saying mental health discrimination remarks like, you know what, I don't understand what you're saying. All I hear is what. Or like what happened was like I went to my grandma's funeral. He changed my schedule. And then he tried to suspend me because he's like, oh, well, you should have not gone to your grandma's funeral. You saw you were supposed to be working the weekend and other things like that. And sabotaging and doing things like making every woman of the store, like boss me around or check my work so he can later yell and scream at me. My last day of work, my dad told me that I'm going to write a professional email to my boss. I'm going to sign it and I'm going to give it to him, and that's going to be my resignation. And you're also going to call and say that you have to resign because you're working at another job. And I remember when I called my boss and told him that I quit, he was like, yeah, whatever. And then he also spread a rumor that I was fired for shoplifting. So because of my father, he was like, oh, no, just, move on and forget him. Like you need to forget him. Stupid advice because I held on to a bunch of anger and I never really processed my trauma and closure. And I've had anger issues and I blown up about how he treated me and other things like that. And now I have another form of trauma on top of that, really, caused by the 48-hour film project. But if I learned how to create some justice, that would help me out, really. Because sometimes we're also taught by our fathers, that we're men. We have our penises. Whenever a boss yells and curses at you, you need to grit your teeth and pick up another shift. Or you need to go home and drink a beer. We're not taught to be fighters. And that's one of the reasons why there's a huge sissy culture in America, or there's a lot of emotional men, because we're taught that men are supposed to hold in their feelings and bury it, and that makes you tough and strong when that actually teaches you to walk through life being a bitch. Like, I think that what I should have done is that I should have just quit the job. I should have gone to Google review and other workplace and store reviews, wrote articles. I should have done YouTube videos and talked about every horrific thing. I should have wrote an anonymous letter to the CEO and other people and really just got my revenge that way, because I would have made a difference. And like I said, that somebody committed suicide because of the bullying that my manager did. That person could be alive, but because my father said, oh no, you need to focus on you. He's a nincompoop. You need to focus on your career. You need to focus on moving to a better job, getting enough money to move out of your brother's place, possibly taking out that penis and making me a grandbaby. And as my therapist said, you're a loser because you live with your brother and other things like that, or other things like that. And I'm going to bring up something else, really. That's not good, really. So we have to teach people that when you go through something bad at your job, you have to create consequences. It can't just be move on and whatever, because there may be some trauma there. There may be some lack of justice. So that's always just very, very important. The next thing that I have to say is you are a poor person. That I remember that, sometimes for lunch, I would talk to my dad and be like, oh, well, I'm going out for sushi or whatever. And my dad would be like, no, you make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You're a poor person. And other things like that. Like, and I also remember that I used to be an artist because I did art in college, but he was always like, why don't you do this exhibition called The Starving Artists? Or why don't you say, you know what, you're a starving artist, you're a starving artist, starving artist. Like, I actually gave up art because my dad was like a fucking Pokemon. Like, his name would be Starving Artist because he would always like starving artist, really. Or he would always be like, you're a poor person. And other things like that. Like, always just trying to like instigate me. You know, like, and like, you know, I dealt with depression, and one of the reasons why I dealt with suicidal thoughts and depression was because my dad would consistently like badgering me, like, oh, well, you make $70 a week, or oh, well, during like winter time, you know, $16, or oh, one time he saw me actually walk to the store with a bunch of food to refund it because I need money for something else, really. Or I'll be drinking water, or I would be like, you know, falling asleep, really. Or I even thought about putting ads in Backpage and doing prostitution like over 11, 12 years ago. And that is a lot when somebody has to consider prostitution or selling drugs or having thoughts about, you know, being a hood nigga or whatever, you know, or living in the woods and learning how to like hunt or cut down trees and find vegetables and berries. Or what I used to do is that I would take a knife and cut off the mold off of food. Like at Stop and Shop, you can buy like moldy food, or food with like mold spots or like brown spots. You take a knife, cut off that spots, and eat the parts that are not like covered in that. And you know, but my father always rubbing it in my face that I was a poor person. So that also kind of happens too, really. Like where some people may be like, oh, that's going to motivate you to get out there and find jobs, really. So, you know, sometimes always like harassing your kids. Sorry, guys, I got an ant on my foot. But sometimes always harassing your kids or busting their balls about not having a lot of money when they're trying to find jobs, or when they lack the social skills to find jobs. That's not good. And then also my other bad piece of advice I'm going to say is not teaching your children how to find jobs. That I remember my dad saying to me that he was working really hard to find me a job in Hartford to work up there with him. But because of different situations that didn't happen, I made some self-destructive choices. And, you know, but I honestly feel that I was a lie, really, knowing my father. But I also remember, you know, when I got out of college, I had a hard time finding a job, really. Like, most people are not taught on how to find a job. And it's not like, oh, well, scream and yell at your kids. You have to be like, okay, you need to go to the Department of Labor. You need to watch YouTube videos. You need to understand connections. Like, my family works for the state of Connecticut. Well, are there jobs, like, close to where my brother lives or close to where my dad lives that are state jobs? Can I ask my dad to help me get in, really? Because my dad doesn't like me living in his house or whatever. You know, so there's like things like that where people don't teach their kids that stuff. You know, I actually knew this girl, I'm not friends with her anymore, but she did prostitution. And one of the reasons why she did prostitution was because her parents forced her to pay for her braces, but she was working at Home Depot and couldn't really afford it, really. So she was like, you know, she was selling like her pussy, really. And whenever her parents worked in New York City, she'd be using their house as a brothel, really. You know, this was like over 10 years ago, but that happens when you have parents that don't teach you how to get jobs, or they expect you to pay all these bills or other things. And there's people who, like me, who almost attempted suicide because it was almost like you're being screamed at and you're being bullied and you're being shouted at to get a good job. It's almost like, as I said, you know, it's like, look, like finding a job back then was almost like this paper bag. This empty paper bag. There's nothing in it. And your parents and everybody's yelling at you to look in that bag and find a $100,000 job. And they're screaming at you, and cursing at you, and rolling their eyes and whatever, and looking like they're about to smash something or throw something at you because you're not getting a job. So, you know, part of, you know, what I've learned really is how I did grow up with a lack of training on how to find a better job, really. So, that's always important. Like we have to teach our, it's bad advice to just say the best way to teach you is to bully your ass, or to demean you, or to point out how you're not making any money, or point out how you're poor to motivate you to get a better job, really. And the last thing that I'll say, because I don't want to make these 30, 40-minute videos, is sexual harassment. That I worked at a hospital, and I had like a coworker take my chest, and he was like rubbing and petting and rubbing and petting, and he was like, or he'd get close to me like he's trying to kiss me, like, and he'd like be like, and like, and I had another coworker that'd be like, for a long period of time, really. You get my point, really. But I remember, like, one time I was talking to my dad about this girl, and she's always like talking to me. She's always like sees me, she talks to me, and I kind of asked her, like, are you into me or anything like that? And later on, I explained to her, and this is true, that I didn't socialize a lot as a kid, really, and I wasn't really sure what it was. Really, we clarified. We're friends now, and I said I respect your boundaries. And I respect where it was. I just wasn't sure. But I remember my dad saying something like when I was talking about how I was being sexually harassed, not every touch is sexual. So when somebody's like, as I said, touching your chest, really, rubbing your chest like they're applying that Vicks 44, that's not good, really. That's sexual harassment. Like what type of workplace do you have where somebody's grabbing your chest and they're like touching it and petting you? And you're not teaching your son that's sexual harassment. And I hate even saying this, but I'll say it. My parents are a gay couple. So that fits into the stereotype of grooming your boys into homosexuality. Because, what's going to happen next, really? I like women and stuff like that. Like, am I going to have a daughter? If my daughter has a boyfriend that's grabbing her ass or filling up her shirt, like, this is feudal Japan where that was common, really. Am I going to be like, oh, well, no, that boys will be boys? Or am I going to be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to talk to him, and I'm going to bring a mouse trap, and I'm going to bring like a finger file to pick off his fingers and tell him, you know what, things are going to happen if you do that. Things are going to happen if you talk to her again, because this is going to stop, really. So not treating sexual harassment like that's a big deal. I also know, like, one time I worked at Southern, I had a coworker come to work drunk, take out his penis, masturbate his penis in front of me, jerk the urine off his penis. And I was told, work another shift. Don't worry about him. You're a custodian, but you have 2 college degrees. Get a better job, really. And I remember after that, I stopped talking to my dad for about 8 or 9 years. Because I was always kind of taught, and that's been a complex I've had for a long time, of whenever I do wrong, it matters. Whenever I don't meet my father's standard of getting a better job, getting a $100,000 job, taking out my dick, fucking a black girl, having a bunch of black kids, because I know that some of my relatives have that thing about me. Like, I'm mixed race, but they want me to embrace my inner black man by having some black babies. Or they want me to be like, what you see in Medea and Tyler Perry movies, where I see a bunch of black kids who are misbehaving. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be your daddy. I'm going to take my paycheck. I'm going to take my overtime sheet, and I'm going to take my personal time off sheet, rip up my vacation sheets, and I'm going to be your big black father, and I'm going to adopt these kids, and I'm going to raise them right, and I'm going to spend my paycheck on them. So it's all that good stuff, Like people want me to do that. People want me to be a dad. People want me to find, black kids who are going down a bad path and be a daddy to them. Adopt black kids so that way I can embrace my inner black man. I've had therapists talk to me like that. Black men need to step up and be black fathers to black children on the wrong path. You see that in Tyler Perry films. Or I'm mixed raced, and people think that I'm black when I'm mixed raced. Or what other people want me to do is to have sex with black women, like pump that sperm, make some more black children, because what some people want you to do is to blacken your genes, really. And my therapist, again, he always wanted me to date black girls. I remember in college, some of my professors wanted me to date the black girls and everything like that, really, and that's not good. So in response to trauma, in response to pain and anger, just taught, the thing to do is just to go through life and better yourself and ignore how people hurt you and have a family and repress your feelings, that doesn't work for everybody. But it's also very, very bad because that says whenever I go through life and somebody disrespects me, somebody sexually harasses me, somebody almost kills me at work, somebody drives me to suicidal thoughts, oh, I'm going to do something like ignore it and ignore how I'm hurting on the inside, or not find closure with all that shit. That's gonna create a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. Really, I'm sorry they have landscapers, out there, right now, really. But as I said, it does not teach a strong man. That it teaches you to be like Thomas Dubois from the Boondocks, where it's just consistent verbal abuse, taking everybody's crap really. And as my aunt said, that she was very worried that I may have a wife and kids, and she said that the way my parents are raising me, I'm gonna be that quiet little man being bullied by my wife and having a bunch of daughters that do whatever the fuck they want, really. Just like Bill Kerwin, if you know who he is, he has a bunch of daughters that do whatever the fuck he wants, and they gold dig him. But that creates the beta man, really, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of men are betas nowadays, because they're taught not to be men, not to stand up for themselves, not to create justice, not to get out there and be brave, really. You're taught to be a little like sheepish worker and everything like that, really. So I'm happy that I learned that part of the problem is getting away from my father, really, because I can't go through life, like I work at a hospital, so I work around psych patients. So if psych patients say something like, I want to kill you, nigger, and whatever, because I've had my patients say things to me like, I want to kill you, nigger, what am I supposed to do? Should I be like, okay, I'm going to become a nurse, and I should work in the psych ward and find some black kids who are struggling and they have no parent, and then I should be like, in the top pair films, I should be like, I'm going to be your daddy, and I'm going to take my paycheck, and I'm going to take all that stuff, and I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to be a good black father to you. Or should I be a nurse where I've been kicked by patients, I've been punched by patients, I have patients threatening to beat my ass and threatening to kill me for coming into the rooms in the middle of the night? Oh, what should I do to become a nurse and start, cleaning, rubbing, should I start like scrubbing penises? Should I start scrubbing dead bodies? Should I turn patients over and scrub their assholes and scrub the shit out of their cracks, really? Should I be cleaning and washing dead bodies, really? Because I'm taught whenever you get bullied, it should motivate you to be successful. No, I should be like, you know what? Do what I did. I wrote a letter to Human Resources about being sexually harassed. I know that I don't want to be a nurse. I know that I don't want to be a psych patient nurse. I know that when people say racist shit to me, or when patients say I'm going to kill you, nigger, I have to report that, because it teaches me not to sit down and take it. And I encourage everybody like that, because I've been taught to sit and take it and be successful, and then as you go through life, people bully you and treat you like shit and say racist comments or think that you're mentally ill, and they can talk to you whatever type of way. And like the Joker famously said, I was taught to take it and be a good little boy, be a good little worker. But no, you have to know how to stand up for yourself. If you want to be successful in this world, it's not just moving yourself forward, it's also just knowing how to make sure you learn from every situation to do bigger and better, and how to socialize with people. Or when we have kids that might be autistic, or when we have kids who are behind socially, or they're a little socially awkward, we bring them into the world, we bring them into the work world with better skills, so they're not taken advantage of or treated like they're stupid. Because I had family members who brought me into the work world and had no problem that people treated me like I was stupid.